Welcome to Module 23. We are talking about economic development, consumption, and sustainability. And so to begin this module, we're talking about the theory of demographic transition. This is a four-phase transition that countries tend to move through as they become more affluent and their sustainability changes. So does their population growth rate. And so this does not fit every country's growth pattern. However, it does fit many countries' growth patterns. And so if we are looking to observe the natural world and to find patterns so that we can make predictions about the future, this is one way that we do this. So phase one, if you look here, this is phase one. So there are certain countries that are in phase one. This is, as you can see, there's a steady state of birth rates and death rates. And so there is no population growth at this point. It's a population steady state. And infant mortality is high at this point because there is disease, because there's a lack of health care, poor sanitation. But there's also a high growth or birth rate because many farmers have many children to help out on the farm. They're not spending time educating and worrying about careers for their children. The children are there to do work. And also to take care of parents as the parents get older because there is no social security system in these countries. And so there aren't many countries in today's world where this is still happening. However, there is a couple, one being Lesotho. The crude birth rate is 26, and the crude death rate is 28 people per thousand. And so this is, as we talked about in the past, due to the AIDS epidemic and wars and famine. So this is not a place in the world that we want countries to remain. Phase two is rapid population growth. So death rates decline because the affluence is increasing, because there is better health care and better access to health care, and that means vaccinations, food, sanitation, clean water. All of those things make a better quality life, and so more people are living. But we know that population momentum, just because we see a change, it doesn't necessarily affect the economy for a while. So people are starting to see that children are living longer, quality of life is improving, the amount of farming is going down. However, people are still having lots of children because that is historically what people did. And so we see this rapid growth rate here is happening in India. India is in phase two. Now let's look at phase three. Phase three, we're going to see even more improved economy, an improved education system, and availability of birth control. We're going to see increased family income, and so we call this affluence. Affluence is the state of having wealth, including money, goods, and property. People have, in this phase, start having fewer children or continue to have fewer children. The children become financially a burden, and people are spending time and money pushing education and careers. And so at this point, it doesn't make sense to have 10 kids because it's just too expensive and just too much work. And so there are parts of the United States and in Canada that are in phase three. Phase four, we start to see a declining population, either a steadying out or a declining population. And this is linked to affluence. And so if there's more affluence, we have a higher proportion of elderly people. And so this is going to increase the amount of pensions that we have to supply and the amount of Social Security services. So this is an increased burden on the earners. There will also be oftentimes a shortage of healthcare workers. And governments begin to encourage immigration to compensate for the people that have to have more children, because at this point the birth rate is becoming, or the total fertility rate is becoming less than 2.0 or 2.1. And so we have examples of this happening in Japan, in the UK, in Germany, and in Russia. There is a phase four continued. So we're seeing in certain parts of the world that are highly developed, we see an increase in total fertility rate. So this means that after the total fertility rate has gone down to about 1.2 to 1.5, it will tends to start to go up again. We're not sure why, but we understand that it might have something to do with the fact that people have enough affluence and enough time to have a larger family, more than 2 kids, 3. And we start to see this in some parts of the United States, like New England or New York, in the bigger in the bigger cities where there is more education and more affluence. We also see this in the Scandinavian countries like Norway. So one way to affect the population growth is family planning. And there's a link to family planning between affluence and education in women entering the workplace that lowers the total fertility rate. If you see here on this graph, women with no education tend to have quite a few more children. So in Ethiopia, a woman without education tends to have 6.1, and a woman with education tends to have 2.0. In Egypt, it is 3.3 and 2.9. And in most of these examples, it's about half. And so the power of education and work and confidence for women is a huge factor to population control. And so we call this family planning, and family planning is the practice of regulating the number of offspring that you have, or the space in time that you have between offspring. So are you going to have 1 kid and then wait 3 years and then have another kid, or are you going to have boom, 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 kid, all 3 years in a row? And so you have that control when you have the availability of contraceptives and health care. And so family planning had a positive example in Kenya, where the total fertility rate was 8 in the 1970s. And then the government implemented family planning, and within 2 decades, the total fertility dropped to 4. And so they did this by advertising to both men and women and educating, saying that overpopulation leads to unemployment, so a lower quality of life, and harm to the natural environment. And they also used ads promoting condom use, so it became popular to have fewer children. Another example of this happened in Thailand, where a very charismatic leader handed out condoms in public and then also encouraged married couples to use contraceptives. And so the growth rate fell from 3.2% to 1.6%, and today it is now at 0.6%. And so those are very positive examples of family planning and its effect on overpopulation. And if we look at some statistics with our resources on planet Earth, of the 7.2 billion people on Earth, 6 billion live in developing countries. And so a developing country, remember, is where people tend to make $3 or less per day. And only 1.2 billion people live in developed countries. And so developing countries, on average, have a growth rate of 1.4% per year, whereas developed countries on average have a growth rate of 0.1. So that's significantly less. And while that is great, unfortunately, developed countries tend to have a greater ecological footprint. We use more, we consume more, we create more waste, we produce more carbon dioxide emissions. And so the world average footprint is 2.7 hectares per capita. And so that is a little bit higher than China. China has 1.8 hectares per capita. U.S. is leading the group in 9.0 hectares per capita, whereas Haiti is 0.5 hectares per capita or per person. And so if we look at this, we can see that a person in the United States tends to have an ecological footprint 18 times greater than somebody in Haiti, which is a very drastic, different type of lifestyle that the two people are living. And so we can examine the ecological footprint of an entire country by multiplying the per capita footprint by the number of people in the country. And so the U.S. has a total footprint. If you multiply the ecological footprint of the country times the number of people, we have an ecological footprint of 2,810 million hectares, whereas China has 2,790 million hectares. And so if we look at this and we understand that U.S. Has, or China has a quarter of the that U.S. has a quarter of the population of China. However, we have a larger ecological footprint. That is surprising. And an unfortunate, a positive fact is that China is developing quickly, so this means it's a better quality of life. However, it does mean that it is going to undergo an increased level of pollution, more consumption, more waste being produced. And so we need to figure out sustainable ways for the entire world to live so that we can make sure that the growing population doesn't have such a drastic or negative effect. Another way to understand the population is using the IPAT equation. So IPAT is an equation used to estimate the impact of the human lifestyle on the environment. It's more of a conceptual understanding than it is a mathematical equation that we to use. And so impact is the overall effect, or the I in IPAT is the overall effect of our actions on the environment. Population is the P, and it just basically says that the greater the number of people in your population, the greater the impact will be. Affluence is the more goods a nation consumes, the greater the impact. And so technology can be difficult to assess because some technologies are both beneficial and destructive. So if we think about CFCs, they were very beneficial. They were a great insulator to refrigerators. They made refrigerators use less energy to keep our food cool. However, they depleted the ozone layer. So it is difficult to use technology or to identify technologies as beneficial or detrimental. And so if we look at the impact of affluence, we can understand that it is related to the GDP, or the gross domestic product. And the gross domestic product is a measure of the goods and services that is used in one year in a country. And so it is made up of 4 types of spending: consumer spending, investments, government spending, and exports minus imports. So the amount of the net income that we have made of exports and imports, or exports minus imports. So as a country's GDP increases, so generally does its ability to afford energy. And so the first step to affording energy, which is what we're seeing in China right now, is coal. And so coal is cheap, it's easy to burn. Unfortunately, it emits lots of air pollution. It degrades the river systems and in the land when it's mined. So it is not the ideal energy source, but it is better to live with pollution than it is to live in poverty. And so if we remember the video from the last module, China's air pollution is exceptionally poor, and so that is one reason why they are working on increasing the amount of sustainable energy. So as GDP continues to increase, cleaner resources become more available. So we can start to put money into research on improving the solar energy, wind energy, maybe making a battery that can store energy for longer, for more of it that will last longer. And so as the affluence increases, so does the amount of regulations to not permit people to pollute. And then regulations are helpful, however, they are meaningless if you don't have enforcement. And so affluence tends to also go alongside enforcement. So you need to be able to pay people and companies and organizations to enforce the regulations that have been created. And there's a lot of places where regulations are, but they are not enforced, and so therefore pollution and unsustainable practices are maintained. But where they are seeing success is once again in Western Europe.